Mozart. I don't think they have any roots in African culture.
Excellent. So if what you're saying is that the white majority America will be a place where everyone just listens to Mozart all day and nobody plays Elvis or the Beatles at any point, then you might be absolutely right. But if white culture does involve Elvis and the Beatles, then it inevitably involves the black artists who influence that too. So we do have this melting pot of culture.
Look. Black people have certainly contributed to music in the United States. Black people have certainly contributed to cuisine. Black people have contributed a number of things. All of these things are, in my mind, peripheral to Western civilization, practically less than peripheral. White people, the people of Europe, really built the modern world. The Industrial Revolution took place in your country. All of the major scientific breakthroughs that established the world in which we live, all of these modern gadgets we depend on,
like
all
algebra,
the ideas,
numbers, that type of stuff. Algebra being
I'm talking
Arabic
about, yes,
and numbers being Indian.
And do you think that why is it that the Industrial Revolution and all of these modern things didn't happen in India? The point is, the modern world that we live in was built by white people, by Europeans. All of the science, all of the technology, and not just that, the whole philosophy of human rights, the notion of democracy, the notion of equal rights for women, all of these things come out of Europe. And to somehow pretend that there's no such thing as European civilization or white civilization is deliberate blindness.
So I'm not here to say that there's no such thing as a white civilization, but I'm saying that the civilizations of Europe themselves are heavily influenced by other areas. If you look, for example, if we take the culture of Spain, and we can say that Spain is very sort of central in Europe, but huge parts of the culture of Spain overlap heavily with Morocco and the constant interchange of people from North Africa into Spain. Huge parts of Spanish the Spanish architecture and Spanish art that influenced people like Gaudi and Picasso are themselves influenced from a constant exchange with North Africa throughout the history of Spain.
Look, you can find all kinds of influences from around the world, but there is a fundamental core of Western civilization that sprang from the genius of a particular people, white people. There is also Chinese civilization. Chinese civilization is a wonderful thing that sprang from the genius of Chinese people. It's not utterly uninfluenced by the West. There were all kinds of early, there was an important Jesuit character who very much influenced the Chinese several hundred years ago. You can find people of that kind, but Chinese culture reflects something that is inherently and distinctively Chinese. Again, you would probably grant that if we're talking about Japanese culture or Korean culture or Mohammedan culture, despite the fact that there were all sorts of influences from outside. Probably it is only in the case of a European country that you're going to make a point of looking for ultimately peripheral influences from outside. This is once again the kind of double standard that people have against the West and against their own people.
But
and I find that a fascinating, hold on, no. I find this an absolutely fascinating phenomenon. It's something that's recent in white people, and if white people do not get over that, they will be displaced biologically and culturally by people who do not have this absolute compulsion to low-rate their own achievements and to somehow think that being displaced by others is virtuous.
But so I think what you're missing in criticizing or writing off as double standard the fact that I would say there is a very clear culture that is Japanese culture, and that I wouldn't say that about white culture, is that I'm not arguing for cultural separatism. I'm arguing that culture is and always has been an exchange between peoples around the world, people from lots of different backgrounds. So when I say, yes, there is very clearly something Japanese about seeing a Hokusai wave, I'm also not saying that this is inherently a property that could only have arisen from the Asian people living in Japan throughout the entirety of Japan. I mean, Japan itself does not have a culture that is isolated from Europe. I mean, the very word for thank you in Japanese, arigato, comes from Portuguese and the Portuguese sailors that travelled there. Culture has always been an exchange from people around the world.
You're wrong about arigato, by the way. But in any case, No, it has another origin that is not Portuguese. But tell me, in any case, it wouldn't make a difference either way. Do you think that the people of New Guinea, or the Aborigines of Australia, or the Eskimos of Greenland could have come up with a wave of hokusai? Ever?
Well, that's a kind of an asinine question, isn't it?
Because, it's not an asinine question. You said that it has nothing to do. You said it had nothing to do with the fact of being Japanese. That came from a distinctly Japanese genius. And I think you could have let the people in Irian Jaya or on Madagascar or in sub-Saharan Africa live for 1,000 years. 10,000 years, they would not have come up with Hokusai's wave.
Well, they wouldn't have come up with specifically the wave, but they might have come up with a level of... No, they wouldn't have come up with specifically that picture in that configuration in that colours, but they would have come up with an artistic expression of the world around them that was every bit as nuanced and every bit as accomplished. It would have just been an expression of where they're from. It's not an inherent genius of attributed to a particular set of genes in a culture. It's emergent from humanity as a culture.
Emergent from humanity. What is it that comes out of sub-Saharan Africa before contact with the West that is comparable to any of 1,000 different creations that we can find in Asia or that we can find in Europe? There is nothing. Great Zimbabwe, we don't even know what it was for. Wood carvings, good grief. No, there are different things that different societies achieve. There wasn't even a written language. There weren't even domesticated animals south of Sahara. There wasn't a mechanical device. There wasn't a 2-story inhabited building south of the Sahara. And to somehow say that everybody is equal in some fundamental way, no. But I do agree with you. If we were to leave sub-Saharan Africa to pursue its own destiny for the next 10,000 years, it might come up with something very interesting. And the more interesting, the better. I want Africans to be the best possible Africans they can at all, under any circumstances, be. And I think this will happen if they are allowed to develop their own particular propensities and abilities free from our influence. What is it that they gain walking around in sub-Saharan Africa wearing T-shirts with Madonna's picture on them? What is it that they gain from wanting the things in the West that they themselves were unable to build? I don't think that's helpful for them. I'm a true believer in diversity. I want all people to be able to pursue their destiny, to follow their own inclinations and build their own culture. And of course, we can have cooperative relations, but large transfers of human beings are only going to result in conflict and denaturing of what would itself be an authentic culture and an authentic expression of a particular people.
Do you believe that America should be an all-white nation?
It can't be now. In order to make it an all-white nation would require too much conflict, too much... No, I don't think it would be a moral thing to undertake. I think the only prospect for the salvation of my people and my heritage in North America is to have some kind of division of territory, some area, some part of the country where whites are the recognized majority and where we, as I said before, can pursue our own identity. Otherwise, 200 years from now, I don't think in North America there will be any white people. If we continue to encourage immigration from all parts of the world, if we continue to encourage the idea that it's somehow wrong for me to want my grandchildren to look like my grandparents and to continue to be white, if that is an idea that's condemned by all the institutions of society, there won't be any white people left. And I have an emotional and I think entirely healthy attachment to my tribe. I do not want to go extinct. And again, if you were talking to a Hopi or a Navajo or someone from, or the San Bushman in the Kalahari Desert, you would be sympathetic. But because we're talking about white people, you have this mental blockage that makes you incapable of being sympathetic.
But so you talk about the extinction of white people, and you compare that, for example, to the extinction of Hopi people, and that's, again, another of these false analogies in that...
It's not a false analogy?
If you'd let me just explain. The reason I would say it's a false analogy is with the Hopi people, there were people specifically trying to make those people extinct by killing them, and those people were the white settlers who did invade and overrun America and take over the culture and put their own culture out there. So unless you're suggesting that when you say that there'll be no white people left and they'll go extinct, unless you're suggesting that there'll be someone looking to either eradicate eliminate white people or send them elsewhere, the argument doesn't really hold. You talked earlier about the numbers of white people dwindling, but it's not the numbers of white people that are dwindling, but the percentage of the overall population, and that's not driven by there being fewer white people, but by the population growing and expanding. So there's no sense that white people will disappear from America.
If white people had intended to exterminate the Indians, they did a terrible job of it, didn't they? The Hopi and the Navajo and the Cherokee and the Cheyenne, the Comanche, they all existed, and the United States gave them. I'm not saying that this was the best part of the United States, but they had territories in which they were recognized as sovereign in their own territory.
But they did.
This was not. Hold on.
This was not a large percentage. Like this was a majority.
This was
of
not. This that's debatable. More Indians died in the far west during the era of Western expansion, killing and fighting against each other than were ever killed by the U.S. cavalry. Furthermore, the fact that they have ever since the late 1800s, early 1900s, they have had their own territory and their own language, and we actually are expending government money to provide them with health care and education and support the maintenance of their languages. All of this stuff is an attempt to recognize that they deserve to survive as a people. Now, when it comes to whites, you can say there's no threat to the continued existence of white people. Well, if our numbers continue to decline as a percentage, and we're not even reproducing ourselves, and if the idea is that anyone who, like me, wants to preserve whites as a distinct biological and cultural group is somehow a white supremacist, a neo-Nazi, and a morally illegitimate person, then it is entirely likely that in 200 years, why should there be any white people left? If we are constantly held up as the cancer of civilization, that we have historically been to blame for all of the wrongs that have ever been perpetrated against any other group, as you say, we tried to exterminate the Indians, which is not true, and all of these evils of colonization, etc., then whites will disappear. I don't want that to happen. I think it is entirely legitimate for me to want my people to survive.
Accountability for history doesn't result in disappearance. For the people who are saying that the colonial forces from Europe that went out around the world in this kind of European expansion and subjugated and slaughtered people in their many thousands in other countries, by saying that by acknowledging that happened, nobody's expecting white people to disappear as a result of that acknowledgement.
No, but the practical consequence. When the Indians decided that they wanted the British out, the British left. When Nkrumah became the first prime minister of Ghana and decided that he wanted the British out, the British left. That did not mean that Africans and Indians should, by any stretch of the imagination, have the right to then go to Britain. The consequence of this constant feeling of guilt about one's past, that somehow one's own cultural or racial identity is illegitimate, this in the long term will lead to extinction. The idea that we do not have the right to maintain our own territories where we are the majority. This will inevitably lead to the thinning out of Europeans and the ultimate destruction of their culture. In the long term, I don't see any other outcome unless there are enough whites who, like the Poles and the Czechs and the Slovaks, who say, look, we have the right to remain who we are. That is simple justice. We're not asking for anything that we do not happily accord to everyone else on earth. It's the fairest way to proceed, and without that, we will disappear.
Okay, well, we should probably end the interview at this point. I recognise I've been talking to you for quite a while. So, Jared, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. If people do want to find out more about American Renaissance, where can they go to read more about the material that you're putting out?
Well, we have a website at AMREN, that's AMREN.com, and we also have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and look for American Renaissance, we have a pretty active YouTube channel. And then finally, we do a weekly podcast that is on YouTube also, and you could look for AMREN Podcasts. And let me thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, and I wish you well in all of your undertakings.
Thanks very much, Jared. Thank you so much.